And he said to me, he said, we think it's already out. So we are in for a global pandemic. The response in Australia had been gradually tightening, and the strategy was changing from one of let's try and keep this out to developing strategies for dealing with it when it came into Australia. Now, by that time, in February, let's say mid-February, toward the end of February, we knew that we would have an epidemic on our doorstep. Whether we could control it or not, we didn't know, but we were looking then at China and looking at the efforts of the provinces other than Wuhan in controlling it. Probably the big story for me is the Shanghai story. So Shanghai was putting on social distancing restrictions of some severity and restricting travel quite severely. And the rates of epidemic growth of coronavirus in Shanghai were nothing like what they were in Wuhan. Now, Shanghai is a big and extraordinarily difficult city to control. So we knew at that point that public health measures would work. This is fairly scary because, you know, as public health people, if things aren't working, we just go, oh, well, you know, don't look at us, we're not going to be able to do anything. But if they are working in big, difficult to control provinces in China, then the wood was on the public health officials to say, right, how are you going to control it in Australia? These efforts were famously summarized in The Economist as flattening the curve, trying to not so much reduce the number of COVID-19 cases that our community would face, but spread them out so that they all didn't arrive in hospital in the same month, all trying to get an ICU bed and completely overwhelming the system. The flattening the curve efforts were about spreading that load across time so that the health services would not be overwhelmed. We had something going for us in that because healthcare workers are one of the first groups to get affected in any city. We're seeing that in Melbourne, and we've seen that in Milan and right around the world. So if the healthcare workers get it early, they can look after you if you can delay it for the bulk of the population. And if we can spread it across time, then maybe we can stay within the health system's capacity, especially if we lift health system capacity at the same time. So that's what the initial strategies were about. These included isolation of cases, isolation of contacts, vigorous contact tracing, closing the border to new cases, so closing or asking all incoming travellers from overseas to spend 14 days in self-quarantine. So that was the flatten the curve strategy. Then there was a shift. The shift was towards saying, hang on, we can actually do better than flatten the curve and have the same number of cases. If we do what some of the other countries in the world, and particularly some of the provinces in China had done, we can actually vastly reduce the number of cases that we have in Australia. This is what the current strategy is trying to do. So the extreme or the strenuous social distancing measures have been brought in. These are slamming the economy. We had, you know, hundreds of thousands of people laid off for weeks in a row, aiming, and the country is actually heading for over 1 million people unemployed, possibly an 11% unemployment rate, and very strong measures are being taken. But it's not just about flattening the curve. It's about actually seriously reducing spread of the virus and aiming to avoid the large numbers that we have seen overseas. And just to remind you how big it can get, there's been 13,000 people killed by the virus in the United States as of tonight. So there's a lot at stake, a lot of lives at stake. And so this strategy of really pushing down the spread of the virus seems to be working. The modelling that the Prime Minister released earlier this week is showing what the strategy is, and the numbers that have been coming out, you can track them yourselves on the media sites, seem to be showing a big and sustained reduction in the number of new cases each day. So where's it going? Just last week, the Prime Minister, the Chief Medical Officer, and the Deputy Chief Medical Officer of the Commonwealth said, look, you know, we might be in for 6 months of this, so strap in. That surprised some of us in public health, and I was very pleased to hear discussions starting this morning in the media that a couple of months of the lockdown may be what it takes, and maybe we can't lift all of the restrictions all at once. But after 8 weeks of the measures that we've got in place, with the closure of non-essential businesses, the school measures, the restrictions on overseas travel, the restrictions on interstate travel that some states, not the ACT, but South Australia, Tasmania, Northern Territory have introduced. These measures might be able to be relaxed after a couple of months. So let's just talk about that scenario. This is a live discussion going on in the expert forums of the Commonwealth, the Australian Health Principal Committee and the National Cabinet, and they haven't landed on things. So this is speculation on my part from here. Imagine Tasmania. Tasmania has got self-isolation requirements for 14 days for anybody arriving on the island. They've been in place for a couple of weeks now. And they've got all of the other lockdown measures that we have. I think it is quite plausible that the virus will actually disappear from Tasmania in the next few weeks, that there are no new cases, and more than that, that the authorities, the Premier, the Chief Health Officer, might come to the view that there is no coronavirus on the island. I suspect if they say that the Chief Medical Officer for the Commonwealth will agree with them. So what do? We've still got the virus going from house to house and from person to person in Sydney and in Melbourne, in southeast Queensland, but Tasmania is virus free. So I think we're going to see a regional lifting of local restrictions. If Tasmania gets to that point and maintains its interstate restrictions, there's no reason why the local businesses, the non-essential businesses, can't get back to work, serving island people and doing their thing. I love your picture in the background there, Peter, of the baristas working in a coffee shop. Something we'd all like to see getting going again. So Tasmania may be first off the blocks in getting back to work and getting back to some semblance of normal life. Now, the ACT may, soon after, we may see that there are not that many cases of COVID in the ACT and that they've all got an interstate origin. That is pretty much the case at the moment. We don't have any cases that have been acquired in the local community from somebody that we haven't been able to track down and identify them as having come from interstate. So what do we do in the ACT? Now, we haven't got Bass Strait between us and Sydney. We've got a pretty fast highway and a few other ways around it, and we're pretty connected into the Sydney milieu. So as we start lifting our restrictions, there's going to be sporadic cases continuing to emerge in the ACT. The question to the public health officials then is, can we control that, or will it get out of the bag? We're probably going to say, look, we can control it to some extent, but we can also tell, if we put good surveillance in place, we can tell if it's getting out of the bag, and we may need to put the clamps back on. So the strategy now, I think, is national lockdown to extinguish the virus in some areas and really reduce its activity right across the nation, recognizing that it may be unsuccessful in extinguishing it in some of our big cities. A gradual lifting of restrictions, particularly in regions where that can be justified and supported, and then a reimposition of local restrictions if things get going again in that area. So I think that's the story of the strategy. A watch and wait strategy in December and January. Try and isolate and contain the nation in February. A flattening of the curve, but perhaps not a real reduction in the cases in early March. And then with from mid-March through till now, with the lockdown, that we can severely restrict the progress of the epidemic in Australia and avoid a large caseload. And now the next part of the strategy is, how do we move in a sensible, perhaps regional, responsive way to lift and then put back on restrictions to control it across the country. That's probably a pretty big burst initially, and I don't know if I should sort of stop there for a bit and see if there's any questions or discussion. You'll notice I haven't brought any graphs. I haven't been throwing too many numbers around. Everybody's an expert on COVID, and there may well be some people with real expertise in the room tonight. I'm a strategist and a long-standing generic public health physician. This is one of the most intense and interesting things I've ever seen in my professional life, and bringing the community with us on strategy is absolutely crucial. So it's been a bit hard to explain, but there we go.
No, it's great, Paul. Having someone who sort of lives and breathes it. Yeah, I think there's most people have questions because, as you say, there's lots of information out there, and none of it's necessarily all current or all aligned. But I noticed Kevin Cox was asking, so how do you trace and test to confirm whether you have achieved that goal of eliminating, at least within a geographic region, COVID?
So with COVID, it's it declares itself at a community level. While some people may have the virus with no symptoms, and many people would have the virus with symptoms of a cold or perhaps a flu. If you have 10 people with the virus, one of them is going to present to the to health facilities, and we'll pick them up there. In addition, for the 9 that we're not, or maybe it's less than that, maybe it's 4 out of 5 that don't feel the need to go to a doctor. It may even be less. But for those, we have now put in place community surveillance or enhanced surveillance, taking 1 in 5 of the people who turn up at the walk-in centres for testing, but don't meet the criteria for a test. Many of them are completely well and just wanted to get a test to reassure themselves. Many of them have had no chance of contact with anybody with COVID, but they're still turning up. So we're just randomly taking 1 in 5 of those to get some background surveillance of where the disease is. We may well ramp up that surveillance across the country to give us a handle on the low symptom or no symptom cases.
I had a question from Henley Samuel. I just will find him here and unmute him so he can ask his question.
Thanks, Peter. I hope you can hear me, Paul. Thanks for your presentation. My question is, the World Health Organization on 15th of January, they tweeted saying, this is not going to spread man to man. It's all nothing, everything is safe. No one needs to lock the border and stuff. But I think we actually locked the border pretty late, and we should have done it ages back. Early, maybe in the middle of February, we should have blocked it, and then we should have stopped all the foreigners coming into the country. We should have opened just for their citizens, and we should have put them on a 14 days isolation, mandatory isolation by the government, not by a self-isolation. So what's your thoughts on that? Like, if we would have done that, would that stopped, where we are now at the moment?
Look, the earlier you go, the more effective the measures. There's no question on that. So your logic is correct. Your judgment about how much earlier we should have gone, it is a matter for judgment, and I think by the time it was brought in, most people were in your camp thinking, shit, I wish we'd gone last week. But we are where we are, and the actual case count in Australia is pretty low by international terms. So we've had 45 deaths in Australia, compared to 13,000 in the US. Now, obviously, we're a much smaller country, but 45 deaths is a tragedy. But I think that at the end of the day, when we look back at this, and when the PhD theses are being written about the different international responses to COVID, Australia is going to be seen as being on the front foot, an early adopter of strong measures, and pretty successful in doing them. Still plenty of time to be proved wrong on that, but I think that's probably where we'll end up.
So another question from Mainul Huck. I'll just unmute Mainul so he can speak.
Thanks, Peter. First of all, thank you, Doctor, for coming and talking to us and our community. I concur with the comment that we are in the front foot. I've got a number of friends in USA, and they are struggling, and they are complementing the efforts and the strategies that Australia is taking. I have 2 questions for you. First of all, how many testing sites we have in the territory? And what are the contingencies to expand the site if and when required?
So firstly, we've got a lot of testing sites. So, you know, a lot of general practices are testing. Both the hospitals are testing. There's the main testing centres at Epic and at Western Creek. There's a further testing centre or a respiratory assessment centre at Canberra Hospital that's doing a lot of the staff testing, both for Canberra Hospital and a number of other institutions. So we're pretty well served. There is the capacity to, so all of the walk-in centres in Canberra are doing some testing, but if needs be, they can each ramp up. I think there is a collaborative general practice approach to setting up a testing on the north side coming too. So this can all expand. The testing is not particularly difficult. It's just that there is some risk to the person taking the test. So you want to be properly trained and you want to have the personal protective equipment on hand. So it's safer for us as a community to concentrate the testing to some expert centres where they can really look after themselves, rather than call on all and sundry health workers to take some tests when the opportunity arises, because that's when they can make mistakes and put themselves at risk.
Okay, thanks, Paul. An online question from Caitlin. Are we on an eradication strategy, or will we all get it over time to gain herd immunity? Is the vaccine realistic?
Well, they're three separate questions. So firstly, we're not on an eradication strategy in Australia or in the ACT. Tasmania is on an eradication strategy. I think that we can really greatly push down the numbers and push down the community transmission. But, you know, Australia will want to open its borders again and start trading and start international exchanges of people. So that will continue to bring it into the country. If we can then catch it, control it, then we may well be able to stop it flaring up and getting into these epidemics that we're seeing in the US cities. I think that's quite realistic. We've seen it in South Korea and in Japan, where they've managed to get COVID back into the box. And I think that the heat is on us as public health authorities to make sure that we can continue to do that. In the long term, do I think we're all going to get it and get herd immunity? I don't know. I think that there's just not enough knowledge on that. The modelling we've seen on herd immunity is pretty theoretical, and there's a lot of work going on now to try and get the empirical basis to back up the hypotheses that have come from that theoretical work. So I just don't know where things are going to go on that. In terms of a vaccine, I think that our vaccine technology and science in the world is pretty good. I've talked to some colleagues in that field and they're pretty optimistic, but there is still some discovery science needed to develop a vaccine. When we produce each year's flu vaccine, it's not discovery science, it's just research and development. It's kind of like a real technological roll it out. We know how to do this. We're trying to get it out early enough and onto the shelves. A coronavirus vaccine is not like that. They've been trying to make one since SARS. in 2003. They've redoubled their efforts when the Middle Eastern respiratory syndrome, another coronavirus, hit in the early teens. And that work has not borne fruit as yet. It's borne a lot of knowledge, but there is still more discoveries that need to be made to develop a reliable technology. I think we'll be well into next year before we see a publicly available vaccine. I think we'll certainly see human trials conducted this year. But you know, it's one of those things, keep your fingers crossed that the scientists can make the discoveries rather than just, you know, seeing the big companies like CSL put it through their R&D machine and out it pops. It's not that simple.
Okay, thanks, Paul. One of our Facebook watchers asks, what about rideshare drivers? They're obviously a very highly exposed community. Is there a testing path in the ACT specifically available for them, or do they take their chances that they might get randomly picked as the 1 in 5?
Look, I haven't got the guidelines for rideshare drivers right at my fingertips. Firstly, if they believe that they've been exposed to somebody with COVID-19, then they can get tested, you know, in the testing centres, and you know, there's no problem with that. They are a high contact group, you know, like supermarket workers and like healthcare workers. So it's an issue, and if they become symptomatic, then they should get some attention to it, and particularly we don't want them continuing to drive and offer their service if they're coughing or sneezing or have upper respiratory tract infections. So you know, talk to the staff at the walk-in centres or to your GP and outline the circumstances, and they'll do the right thing by you.
Great. Look, there's no one else with their hand up or asking. I did have one question, and it relates to some of the others they said that they've been asked. Obviously, you know, the Australia's trend is looking good. We you know, apparently have flattened our curve relative to other countries. Is it just because we've done the basics right in terms of social distancing and all that, or is there something intrinsic about the Australian healthcare system, or we're robustly healthy, or we're just lucky because we're on an island? Is there something special about Australia that's made us, put us in a position where we can deal with the pandemic better?
Look, I think the first thing is that we are a wealthy country that is well governed. I mean, I think we could all suggest how it could be better governed, but we have pretty strong systems of government in place, including public health control, business control. The second thing is that we've got our ears and eyes open. So we have had our experts looking at the situation. As I say, I first came across it on about the 17th of December, so in the week before Christmas. And when I talked to some of my colleagues about, oh, you know, have you heard about this coronavirus in Wuhan? They said, yeah, last week, where have you been? So, you know, there's people watching it. We've watched the Milan scenario and very closely. Personally, I've been much more interested in the South Korea developments, because they took a very strong public health approach to it. And also one of my former students, I used to run the Masters of Public Health program here at the ANU, and one of my students, an AusAid scholarship chap, is now the deputy in the Centre for Disease Control in South Korea. So I've been corresponding with him and watching how they controlled what was a extremely serious, big epidemic outbreak in Daegu province, one of their bigger provinces, and their measures were breathtakingly successful. So we've been learning from that. Other colleagues, I have a lot of Mandarin-speaking colleagues who have been reading the Chinese literature in Mandarin as it's come out, and we've got a strong representation in Australia in the World Health Organization forums and networks. So I think it's that knowledge that's given us some confidence and made it questions of judgment rather than questions of, you know, do we know what's going on?
Okay. Look, the last question I had and I did warn you that we tend to be somewhat a little bit parochial, and the question is of course, have there been any confirmed cases of COVID-19 in Gungahlin?
Oh, I don't know. I'm sure there have. We've had enough in the ACT that if there was none in Gungahlin, I'd be extremely surprised. Actually, no, I do remember I saw a map of cases across Canberra, and the only place it has had some, but a low number is Western Creek. So Gungahlin's got the pretty much the same number as average in Canberra, and that's because all you buggers fly overseas quite a lot. Perhaps not quite as much as the embassy belt, but you know, most of the cases have been acquired overseas or on the cruise ships. We've had quite a number from the Ruby Princess here, and Gungahlin's a you know, pretty cosmopolitan place. I don't know. I always use this test of trying to imagine, you know, you're in a room of people in your local community and you ask them, how many of you have been overseas in the last 12 months? I'm pretty sure you've got a lot of frequent flyers in Gungahlin, and that is frankly the biggest risk.
Right. Okay. Yeah, so a few locals are suggesting in the chat windows that they know of the odd case here and there. So that's hardly to be surprised. Hardly to be surprised about. Paul, look,
one thing
yep.
that I would say about Gungahlin is right around the world, people are in social isolation, either self-imposed or imposed by the authorities, and it's pretty hard to think of a better place to do it than Gungahlin.
No, well, that's great. Well, I think, although I think a lot of us would love to know exactly what's, you know, where every case is, I'm not sure that would actually make us feel better. And I think we need to be mindful of the privacy considerations of individual cases as well. So even if we are aware of individual cases, I think we need to be extremely careful about how that information is shared. And I'd ask that everyone be mindful of that.
Yeah, very, very much so. But more particularly, if you know people in isolation for whatever reason, you know, give them a phone call from time to time. Reach out a bit. If you're closer to them, they may ask you for a bit of help, you know, with shopping or with whatever. But as a community, if we can look after each other, I did want to finish on a message that physical distancing is the way to beat this virus. Our job as a community is to make sure that physical distancing doesn't lead to social isolation. Social isolation is a terrible term. We should never have used it earlier on. We've now moved to physical distancing, not social distancing, and our job is to make sure that we stay in touch with our circle and keep the socializing going, including through things like this Zoom meeting.
Yeah. Right. Well, thank you for coming along tonight, Paul. We do have some more COVID discussions coming up, so you're welcome to stay on. But otherwise, I'll just, on behalf of those attending and those on the Facebook live stream, thank you very much for making the time available in what must be a pretty busy schedule. while we continue on all things COVID, I've just noticed that Tracy McMahon from Lifeline has joined us, and this is really, I think, an interesting perspective on what we've just heard from Paul. This is sort of at the front of all this public policy stuff. There's, how does the community deal with all of this, all these challenges around the way we're living and working and existing. So Tracy, I'll unmute you now and ask you to jump in and perhaps talk a little bit about the Lifeline experience and COVID-19.
Great, thanks Peter, and thank you all for having me and taking the time to listen tonight. Happy to join and be part of this conversation. I think for us as a service, it's really important that we mention the fact that, which is no surprise to anybody or no new news to anybody, but it has been a fairly interesting year to date for us as Australians. We started the year with obviously the bushfires and a lot of uncertainty and a lot of anxiety certainly sprang from that. And from a service perspective, in terms of Lifeline, we were already, looking at a huge increase of calls coming through relating to the stress that caused. The reason I thought I would mention that to start with is I think it's also really important that we recognise we've pretty much gone from one crisis to the next here. We've had little to no time to, I guess, deal and heal from the first one, be the bushfires, and now we're faced with this global crisis of COVID-19. And that's a pretty hard balance for a lot of people out there. It certainly, is very indicative of the numbers of calls that we get and the levels of stress that are coming through our phone lines. So pretty quickly, our organisation, Lifeline, from a national standpoint, had to change its focus to meet the immediate stress of what's going on in the world today. I call it a good day. And what I mean by a good day is minus COVID-19, minus bushfires, minus these sort of big scale crises going on. Lifeline over a year will receive just over 1 million calls on a national level. We make a lot of effort to answer as many of those as we can. Nationally, we answer around 85 to 90%. So, that's a pretty good hit run. But what that also means is that we have 10% of our callers going unanswered. And if we look at the sheer numbers of those, that's about 100,000 a year. So that's a lot of people. But why I'm saying that is because come now to the world we're in today, and the uptake of calls is significant. We've got to be very conscious of that as a service and ask more of people than we do, and we already ask a lot of our people to really be there in times of need. So I just thought I'd sort of put that out there. Lifeline's a pretty well recognised organisation. It's been around over 50 years now. We have 42 centres scattered across the country. So I'm speaking from a national perspective, but I'll talk a little locally as well. Most of those people who are on our crisis line are volunteers. So they come in, they do their shifts from purely a volunteer base, which is absolutely incredible. And they do that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, which is, it's just phenomenal. Nationally, we answer, again, on that good day, like I mentioned before, around 2,000 calls a day. It's around the middle of March when I guess this all kicked off for us here in Australia. We were answering 3,500 a day, so 1,500 calls over a day was the increase that we saw. So it's around 25%. Globally, we're being told organisations similar, to ours around the world have seen a 300% increase. So that's something that we've got to be prepared for and got to be thinking about in terms of, strategic planning because I guess if you know, this could be us in a couple of weeks' time. So something we're constantly working on in the background. In those calls that I mentioned, those 3,500 a day calls, our data shows that 40% of those are COVID-19 related. So that was a surprise to a lot of people because they thought it would be more than that. But it's not a surprise when we think about the fact that Lifeline's already so utilised by so many people out there. So people are still reaching out to us for other than COVID-19 related matters, which is important as well, that we still meet, you know, the needs of our regular customers, if you like. Anecdotally, we do hear a different story than the 40% I just mentioned. Sorry, our volunteers locally, so our local volunteers, you know, they are saying it's more like 90% of calls coming through are COVID-19 related at the moment, and that's not just necessarily directly linked to the virus, but it might be flow-on effects. So, you know, people who are in isolation and they're feeling the effects of that, you know, all the way down to people who have lost their jobs, you know, that sort of gamut of things. No new news here, but what we know of a service is that the effect this virus is having on people is really substantial. You know, whether we're directly affected or not, it's hitting people really hard. As a collective organisation, we're hearing higher levels of distress than we ever have done before. So any other crisis or any other, you know, sort of concern that's occurred, this one seems at this point in time to be outdoing everything. The bottom line for that, or the common denominator, I should say, for that seems to be just the level of uncertainty. You know, there is so much uncertainty and there are so many unknowns, and that naturally causes anxiety. You know, it's triggering a lot of anxiety in people who already live with mental health issues, but it's certainly triggering a lot of anxiety in people who, you know, were caught unaware of the fact that perhaps they would feel so anxious about something like this. One example, a pretty classic example at the moment, is we're seeing a lot about job loss in the media. You know, in the first week or so, we saw, I think it was 1 million Australians out of work. That's never happened to us before as a country, and it's certainly never happened to us as a service at Lifeline, where we've had to deal with the influx of the effects of that. That's you know, to cut a long story short, that's one of probably 1,000 issues that people are phoning up and talking about. You know, we're getting anything and everything you can imagine that the virus would be touching. The previous speaker, I only caught the tail end of what he was saying, but this loneliness and isolation is something that I think really needs to be talked about and really needs to be thought about. Those two things were already, or are already, such huge issues in our society. Lifeline refers to loneliness as the silent killer. It's one of the leading causes for people to start to think about suicide. Loneliness seems to be something very difficult for people to comprehend, to deal with, you know, to live with. So actually, if you think about our whole country at the moment, we're being forced into that circumstance. So for some people, that's pretty catastrophic. And as a service, that's, you know, that's something that we are addressing. To be honest, we're addressing that daily, whether COVID-19 exists or not. But it's certainly now a really big factor in a lot of the conversations that we're having. So what are we doing for these people that are phoning through, and for the community as a whole? Because I guess that's what I've spoken about, is the reality of the situation, but how do we move forward? How do we help people move forward? And also, how do we keep, I guess, a light of positivity in a pretty negative space at the moment? it's a pretty simple answer from our end. We aren't really responding terribly differently to what we would any other time. We're there for people when they phone, for whatever reason it might be that they're phoning through. We are really making a very big effort to try and answer every single call that comes through. Like I mentioned at the beginning, that's a challenge on a good day. So it's an even bigger challenge for us at the moment. But we're seeing some really positive, our volunteers have really stepped up, and we're seeing some really positive early data about that. So we are answering more calls actually than we ever have done before. We're there to listen to people and provide support and, just be there for people. We are the tail end or the pointy end of things. We are, as we always are, but now more than ever, supporting a lot of people who aren't safe. An unfortunate factor of all of this is the increase in family violence. Unfortunately, that's a reality. So it's a part of our work at the moment is to put safety measures around those who aren't safe. But suicidal ideation, so people with thoughts and feelings of suicide increase. So we're certainly dealing with a lot more of that. And everything else that comes in between. We're also now more than ever encouraging people to remain connected. We hear the effects of isolation and disconnection on the daily, again, without this virus in our world. So we know the devastation it causes. So we are big advocates for it, but even more now, whatever medium it is possible for somebody, we encourage connection where it's possible. And more than ever, we're also asking people to ask for help. Whatever that might be, we're asking people to be honest with themselves. What do they need? What's actually possible? What can be done for them at that point in time, and to actually ask for that. And that's, I guess, the kind of main messages as a service, as a national service that we're really trying to put forward at present. We too, like everybody else, are scrambling day by day, finding out new things, new information, and adding and minusing where we need to. So each day is a learning opportunity for us at the moment. And hopefully we're on the right track. Lifeline Canberra, I'll also note, offer community training. So we do a lot of education to the wider community. This is also something that you'll hopefully hear and see as a Canberra community coming out very loudly, that although, our usual mode of delivery of training is face-to-face, people come to a classroom, that sort of thing, but that's not possible at the moment. We're working very hard and tirelessly at the moment to create virtual classrooms using Zoom to be able to still offer that service, because we're getting a lot of calls from people saying, I need to know what to say to my partner when they come home and tell me that they've lost their job, or I need to be able to help my son when he's, struggling because he's not able to thinks he can't complete his year 12 studies, or, whatever the need might be. We're getting a lot of requests from people that having some skills around that would be really beneficial. And that's what our education provides, is, those sort of, I call them basic crisis communication skills. If that's something anyone's interested in, you can find us on our website, Ask Me Tonight, there's find us on our Facebook, Instagram, the usual mediums, but we're very, very busy at the moment, working very hard in that space as well. And that's kind of the nuts and bolts from me. There's a lot more to it, and I'm more than happy to answer questions or clarify or go over anything that might be of interest. But there's just a little bit from the Lifeline world.
No, it's kind of staggering. Every aspect of everything we do seems to be strained in some way. Either it's being strained because it's been closed down, or it's being strained because it's got to pick up the slack somewhere, and certainly Lifeline's one of those. Obviously, we're open for questions, so if anyone's got something, either raise a hand physically or logically online, or send me an instant message. Tracy, does Lifeline keep any track of how the various districts of Canberra are going, and whether there's a distribution, and is Gungahlin more depressed or making more calls than Western Creek or Tuggeranong? How do we track as a community? Is that a useful or sensible question to ask?
Yeah, no, look, it's a sensible question, but the answer is no, we don't. We don't hold that sort of data. We certainly get data around how many calls are answered from the Canberra Lifeline Centre, but we actually keep it quite national mainly because it's the service prides itself on being a very anonymous service. So, the rights of our callers always remain that they keep their privacy and things like that. So we don't really keep, or we're not privy anyway, I probably should say. I'm sure it is there somewhere, but we're not privy to that kind of information. But we know how many calls the Canberra Centre would answer on a month-by-month basis.
Right. Yes, and someone's just reminded you definitely need to make sure you post the Lifeline number, at least in the chat window, or say it out loud so that it gets captured on the feed. So.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'll say it out loud. It's 13 11 14,
13.
And I'll put it in the message.
Yeah, great.
Are
there any other questions
really
from
we forget to do?
Those online, wave or chat? No. All right. Nothing from our Facebook world, Dave?
No.
No. Okay. All right. Look, Tracy, thank you so much for coming on. I am like, Paul just now from ACT Health. I think your world is moving a lot faster than it is for some of us, where everything's slowed down a little bit. So thank you very much for coming on so late and letting us know how it's all going. And good luck. So thank you. And Tracy, you still there?
Yes, thank you, and thank you all for having me.
No worries. Thanks, Tracy.
Okay.
All right. We've on to our third topic for this evening, and it's not a COVID-related topic, but it is related to people who provide services in the community. I'd like to, as most of you know, we probably get members of the Gungahlin police station to come along every year and give us a bit of an update on crime and other matters in the Gungahlin region. This evening we've got Troy Roberts with us, who's not with the Federal Police. He's with the Australian Federal Police Association, which is the professional body that represents police, the police force. And Troy has been working within AFPA on a number of programs here in Gungahlin, and has generously made his time available to talk about that. So I'll just unmute you, Troy, and ask you to jump in and just give us an outline of what AFPA have been up to.
Yeah, thanks for the invite, and I've been looking forward to this for a while now. It's nice to have a bit of social contact, even though it's not face-to-face, but that's the new world that we live in at the moment.
It is.
We've been doing actually a lot of work out at Gungahlin. We have serious concerns about the sort of police infrastructure out there, particularly the station. We don't believe it's fit for purpose for the Gungahlin community. It was probably fit for purpose back in 2006 when there were 31,000 people out there. But based on the ACT government stats, Gungahlin is going to be the second biggest district in 2020, and hello, here we are. And police numbers and stuff like that in relation to police hasn't grown with the population out there. And that's a really big concern for us, for the community response aspect of it, but also for the health and the welfare of our members stationed out there. We've been out there quite often. The poor guys and girls out there, they sit on each other. There really is no room in that building anymore. And so we're petitioning government quite hard to have a look at future accommodation sites and stuff like that, along with ACT policing. Both parties can see that, the station is not great, but, a lot of funding now, from both federal and also state and territory is going to be tied up in COVID and the COVID response and the stimulus packages and stuff like that. So I think for the short term, and unfortunately for the members out there, it's probably going to have to do. But we are looking at some other models. We had a chat with the Shadow Minister for Police a couple of weeks ago now about possibly the police taking over the Gungahlin desk and ESA, fireys and ambulance moving out to a new desk out the back of around Horse Park Drive or somewhere like that. Our reasoning for that is we believe police still need to be in the town centre. It's the hub of Gungahlin, and we need a police presence there. Moving the police station out to Ford or anything like that really isn't ideal. But we also realise that land is quickly drying up in that town centre area. Our rationale is also that with the fireys and with the high-rise buildings out there, they need a large truck, and some of those streets in the town centre, they've got buckleys of getting a large truck around there. So that is one model that we're looking at. Another model is to look at building a new police station. But as I said, that will depend on location and future funding from government.
Right. In terms of the number of police in Gungahlin, I mean, is that, are we like, do we have twice as many? I mean, how do we stand up compared to Belconnen or Tuggeranong or any other parts, and indeed other cities outside Canberra?
Yeah, good question. I'll stick with Canberra because that's what I know. Basically, Gungahlin is under strength, under resourced with police officers. Most other stations on a good shift will have one sergeant and 5 or 6 constables. Gungahlin on a good shift maybe down to 1 and 4. On a bad shift at 1 and 3 type of numbers. Gungahlin's expanding, and I worked out there. I spent 3 years out at Gungahlin Station, and I remember when there was a sheep paddock behind the police station, and the stuff like that. So it's the staffing needs to increase, but also once again it gets back to the station. There's no point in moving 20 extra officers out there if they haven't got a seat to sit on or a computer to type their jobs off on, or the infrastructure out there to support them. Part of our core of looking at either taking over the desk or building a new police station is the community out there are shortchanged compared to the other police stations. The other police stations have a family room. They have a family violence room, so it's not quite a intimidating environment for victims. They also have their own dedicated crime teams who are detectives and investigate the large or more serious crimes. At the moment, if something serious happens out of Gungahlin, like a homicide or something like that, then they take resources from Woden, Belconnen, Tuggeranong City to cover Gungahlin. And once again, I think that's shortchanging the community out there. I think there's a big enough population out there to justify their having their own crime team.
Yep. So I guess anyone else with any questions or concerns? I note that I noticed that, Kevin. I'll get you up in a sec. When we conducted our community survey, little visible police presence was something that was of concern for nearly 50% of residents. So it's something that is topical. And so it's something that people are aware of. Kevin. Whoops, sorry, I haven't unmuted you. You've muted yourself as well.
Yeah. Here we go. Can you hear me?
Yep.
There is going to be released land in Gungahlin for community services. It seems that this is a good opportunity for us to be putting in for more community services, including the police. So the police could well be a core part of us being able to get a community centre and a community facilities in Gungahlin. So it's a good time, I think, to be approaching this thing. About how much space how much of a building do you need?
Yeah, and that's a difficult one to answer. Like, if you look at the current desk is a good size. If we were looking at putting more services out there, like if we moved into the desk, there may be ability, as I said, to put a traffic operations team out there or some other teams out there, so we can multi-purpose the building. You know, get more bang for your buck. As far as a police station goes, I would probably model it on the Belconnen police station that was built a couple of years ago. I think that back then it came in at a cost of about $25 million to build. And that caters, that is a fantastic police station. It's environmental friendly. It ticks all the boxes. It is a well-built, really good police station. So if there was scope to build a new police station, we'd be in favour of replicating the current Belconnen police station.
That's the one opposite Canberra High School.
That's the one next to the Winchester Centre on Belconnen Way, just near the markets.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So how would you suggest we start to promote that or to agitate for it?
Yep. Obviously, writing to the minister is a good protocol, and individually, but also as a body. The Shadow Minister, Julia Jones, is very aware of the issues that we have out here at Gungahlin, and she's keen to have a look at a number of models to assist police. I would probably start with those two. It also wouldn't hurt. ACT policing are very aware of the issues out there, but their hands are tied by building size and funding and stuff like that, which I know is no comfort to you guys out there at Gungahlin. So I'm not sure if there'd be any value in petitioning the Chief Police Officer. He said, I think he's very aware of the issues. So at the end of the day, the money has to come from government. It'll be more territory-based, but given the fact that the AFP is also a federal entity, it wouldn't hurt to also, Peter Dutton's the Home Affairs Minister. He's responsible for the AFP. Wouldn't hurt to petition him either.
Ted,
we'll fire up the keyboard. Get engaged. Any other questions? Show of hands. Anything else? Nope, no one online. No chats. Yes, someone's just observed a good election topic to be pursued by the GCC. Yes, there'll be a few on that. All right. Well, look, Troy. Yep. Okay. Sorry, Jeanette, and now the McRae's. I'll just unmute you. Go, McRae's.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm involved with Neighbourhood Watch in Harrison, and I'm also concerned about the police presence or lack of police presence, perhaps in Gungahlin. My understanding is that Gungahlin now has around about 75,000 people, which is much larger than many regional towns in Australia. Gungahlin is a large area, and I keep statistics sent to me by the police, ACT police, on crimes. And for example, in December 2019, we had 23 criminal incidents in just Harrison, in Harrison. There's motor vehicle theft, number plate theft. There's assaults, 3 assaults, 3 burglaries, and in February, just the February past, we had 18 incidents through a lot of those categories. So I'd like to really find out how much of those crimes are actually solved. What's the completion rate of solving those crimes? And I'm not too sure if he'd be able to tell us that, but it's just something I'm concerned about. I mean, if that's happening in just one suburb, Harrison, what's the whole of Gungahlin like? Yeah,
we definitely echo your concerns because, yeah, crime doesn't stop, it doesn't sleep, and only having one car out there to patrol the whole of Gungahlin on a night shift, or 2 cars on a day shift is, you know, it's not satisfactory in anyone's books. So it's the guys and the girls on the ground are, you know, they're incredibly hardworking. They want to get out there. They want to, you know, do their job. But clear up rates are difficult, especially with stuff like number plate theft and stuff like that. But you know, there's enough literature out there to say that if someone steals a motor number plate, they're more than likely going to go and commit another offence. So it gets back to community policing, and unfortunately, it gets back to having members on the road, having members out there driving around, pulling up people. You know, why do people walk the streets at 2 a.m. in the morning? Well, the job of the police is to ask them the question, why are you out and about? But because of the lack of resources and the lack of members on the ground, they just can't cover that. It's a huge area out there, and it's ever expanding. You know, they patrol from pretty much Epic all the way to the border, past Hall. Yeah. So their patrol zone is enormous, which, once again, lack of resources impacts on response time. If you have a critical incident and the only one car you have is out at Hall and you live in Harrison, you know, they'll get there as quickly as they can, but, you know, if it's a life or death situation, those 5 minutes are going to feel like an eternity. And vice versa for the guys on the ground. You know, we've had a couple of incidents out there where police officers have been assaulted, and their backup have to come from City or Belconnen, which in the heat of a battle, 2 or 3 minutes, as I said, when you're fighting and wrestling with someone, that's an eternity. Last thing I want to see is a police officer get injured or killed and having no backup. So that gets back to the welfare of the members. I've got a couple of people out there who are concerned for their safety when they're on duty, because their backup is potentially a long way away.
Yeah, and look, I think good comments, Troy, and I think they're pretty aligned to what the McRae's are saying. I know Rod Anderson, when he comes along and gives his update, he does talk to some of these completion rates, and you know, it's pretty obvious. You know, they've got to make some tough calls about, well, we can't do everything that needs to get done, so we're just focusing on, you know, the tips of the iceberg. So, all right, I think they're good points. Anyone else got a question or a query? No. All right. Well, look, Troy, thank you for keeping this topic live. Like I said, we want to make sure that what we're doing and saying is well aligned to what you're hearing from the people you represent. So I'm sure we'll be talking more in the coming weeks and months, if we ever get to doing anything other than talk about the COVID pandemic. So.
Yeah, no, as I said, just thank you for the opportunity. As I said, it is a topic which is pretty important to us at the moment. You know, we know that the community out there deserve better, and we also know that our members out there deserve better. Yep,
cool. Well, thanks, mate, for coming along tonight.
No worries, thanks. Thanks for the opportunity. Have a good night, all.
Yep, thank you. All right, so look, we'll just move to a bit of a wrap up here. Normally we do our sort of what's going on in the last few weeks since our last meeting at the beginning of the meeting, but we tried to get things cracking once we had speakers on and so on. Look, obviously, much of the GCC's activities are interacting with government, and the government really has shut down almost all activities that aren't related to essential services and dealing with the COVID pandemic. A number of the forums that we normally attend have been deferred or suspended. And in fact, there's been an internal communication inside ACT government to cease all policy work. It's not been widely communicated externally of government, but internally, all the policy groups are being repurposed to focus on the immediate shorthand. Well, you know, I did notice, and we did share this on Facebook, that the charity bins are going to be removed. And you know, as a number of people have pointed out on the Facebook page just in the last few minutes, that doesn't seem to stop people dumping things. And I'm not sure how we fix that, and other than maybe exhort the ACT government to look at some sort of community education program about how they can get rid of their waste, other than just dumping it on a blank block or next to a charity bin, which of course that option's gone away now. So that's been an ongoing piece of work. Look, Cameron Leslie's on this call, and I've been approached by Pedal Power, who are doing a piece of work to identify cycling infrastructure requirements in the Gungahlin region. And so I'll put out a note in the next day or two asking from other interested Gungahlin residents to perhaps have a call a bit like this, and we'll discuss, what we think might be important new things for cycling infrastructure around Gungahlin. And so keep your eyes and ears peeled for that. But I might just throw to Mark Scarborough from My Gungahlin, who's been actively tracking the progress of the cinema DA. Mark, I understand there's news. You're probably muted, so that was a really...
Take myself off mute.
Yep.
If you're playing along with the video conferencing bingo card, that's a good one for you there. Yep. So the news came out today that the cinema development has been approved with some conditions. One of the concerns that I certainly raised when the DA came out was the car parking that was being put into the actual development application, and unfortunately, the representation that I've put in, and maybe others have put in, hasn't made any difference. So they are going ahead with I think it's about 116 car spaces. The normal requirements for that development would actually have been around 417 car spaces. So I think it's a bit disappointing that a development of that size, has that limited car spacing. So some of the reasoning behind that was cinema goers would be going to the movies late at night, where there would be a lot more car parks available. The applicant in the DA did talk about using other car spaces in the town centre. I don't think that's particularly fair to rely on other developments such as Gungahlin Village or the Marketplace to use their car spaces for this development. But that's the way it stood up. They've also kind of leveraged the fact that there's light rail virtually outside the front door of the cinema complex. I'm not sure that that's an entirely good argument either, noting that light rail at the moment would be bringing people in from Harrison and Franklin into the town centre. I'm not sure how many people will be catching the light rail from, say, Dixon or beyond into Gungahlin for the movies. Maybe they would. Maybe they'd also go to Dendy. But also, the rest of the population in Gungahlin is obviously, not on that necessarily that alignment. And I'd question whether the buses would service the town centre late at night for movie going, as they suggested. The other point the applicant made as well is that having to put in the car spaces that would be normally required may not make the project viable. And I think that's a disappointing out view as well, noting that when they bought that block of land, they knew what they were buying and what the requirements were of that block. The good news, I suppose, is that the DA has been approved, and hopefully that means we'll see some kind of construction start sooner rather than later. This has been, a very long journey to get to this point. Progress is progress. We'll certainly keep an eye on where things go from here.
All right. Mark, thank you for that update. Look, we're close to the end, so unless there's some specific questions or requests for us to look at something going forward, he says scanning, looking for hands up, any indications? Looks like we might be close to the end. Mark, one more thing.
Oh, look, I think this is a good format. It'd be good to get people's feedback. It may not necessarily be a case of using this necessarily through Facebook Live all the time, but maybe having working groups focus on key portfolios within Gungahlin, using this kind of technology could be quite good. The uptake, I suppose, on Zoom's been quite positive, and we've got a reasonable audience through the Facebook Live as well. But, you know, as we're leading up to the ACT election, you know, this might be a good opportunity to have different working groups representing different parts of Gungahlin and what we can represent into the lead up to the election.
Yeah, look, I think that's a great idea, and I think there, you know, as it's been pointed out, there's 80,000 of us out here in Gungahlin now, so it's there's got to be some people out there who A, care, and B, have some skills and time to put into these things. So definitely do that. Yeah, just on the Facebook Live, there've been a couple of comments about why we're bothering, and the answer was, well, that's how we've been traditionally getting the event out electronically, and so Facebook gives us a Facebook Live was provided because it gave us continuity with what we were doing, plus in theory extends our audience, whereas Zoom enabled us to pull in speakers from wherever they happen to be, which we can't really do with the Facebook live streaming. So that's why we've ended up doing two. You know, if you know, I've certainly been on calls in the last few weeks with over 200 participants, which, when you know you manage the muting, actually works surprisingly well. So you know, it's definitely a good tool to bring people together. So yeah, if you've got some feedback, please throw us an email or send us a post on Facebook. That'd be great. All right. Well, on that note, to wrap, thank you, Mark, for your contribution, support for My Gungahlin, and for David Pollard. He and I, Mark, had a very interesting hour leading up till 6:30, trying to understand why the obvious wasn't, and why things that were working half an hour ago had stopped. But such is the nature of things. So thank you all for staying with us and participating in the call. It's been good to see a whole bunch of faces. All you've seen is your own circle of family for a little while. Not that you don't love them, but it's nice to see a bunch of new faces. So thanks very much. Good night, all. I'll unmute all so you can all make cheery bye-bye noises.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Oh my goodness, look at that children back there. Good night.
Good night.
And I love the baristas behind you.
Oh yeah, well, one day soon we'll be back there. Right, good night all.
Nice.
And I like the lake behind you. I'm out of here.
Someone's got the kids.